Today I'm going to show you how to adjust the amount of contrast in your image as well as the exposure of your image using 3 different methods. So the first thing we're going to do is create an adjustment layer. These are really good way to edit your image because they're non-destructive. So if it goes wrong, all you need to do is delete the layer. You don't have to undo everything. So adjustment layers are on this button here, which is a kind of half-filled circle. When you click that, you get this great big list of different layers that you can open up. These 4 here are all to do with your brightness and your contrast. So we'll start off with the one that is actually called brightness and contrast. You'll see it opens up a second layer here. What you can do is use these sliders and click and drag to either make your image brighter or darker. The exposure for this image we're pretty much happy with, so I'm going to leave that. But the contrast is looking a bit flat, so we want to increase our contrast. So I'm going to just drag this to the right, and you can see when I hide that layer by clicking on the eye, it's added in that bit of extra contrast. That's the first way, and it's the most simple. The next method we're going to look at is called levels. If we go over to our adjustment layers panel and we open up where it says levels, what you'll see is a histogram appears above your layers panel. Levels is slightly more complicated than the previous method that we looked at, but it does give you a lot more control because instead of having one slider to adjust your contrast, you have 3. If you look just underneath the histogram, you'll see that there's a very dark grey little triangle, a lighter grey triangle, and a white triangle. What these signify are your highlights, your mid-tones, and your shadows. If I click and drag the shadows slider down, it's going to darken down my shadows, but it's going to basically try and leave my highlights alone. Therefore, I can bring my highlights up, increasing the contrast between the dark and the light. And I can then adjust my mid-tones if I think my image is overall a little bit too dark or a little bit too bright. And again, you can see what a big difference that simple adjustment makes to the image. The third and final method we're going to look at is curves. Now, curves gives you the most control out of anything over the separation between your highlights, your mid-tones, and your shadows. So we'll open up a curves adjustment layer. And again, you'll see a very similar histogram to what you saw when you open up levels. But on this one, rather than having 3 separate sliders, you've got a diagonal line that goes from your shadows all the way up to your highlights. And you have a grid overlaid on top of this histogram. There are certain points where the grid crosses over that are really important. So you've got this first area here, that is your shadows. Then you've got this central area, that's your mid-tones. And then finally, this crossover at the top, they are your highlights. Now that we've put those 3 anchor points in, I can drag up my highlights and it's not really going to affect anything other than the highlights themselves in my image. If I then go over to my shadows, I can drag that down. And again, it's not really going to affect anything other than my shadows. However, what you can see from the histogram is that my image is overall weighted into shadow. So now it looks a little bit too dark. So I'm going to take my mid-tones and I'm going to bring the whole thing up a little bit. And that is a nice, sharp, contrasted image. If we show you the original and now the edited version, again, it's made a huge difference and is very quick and easy.